January 31, 1945, Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. Major Frank T. McCoy's hands trembled slightly as he photographed. The aircraft before him, an intact Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber bearing the tail number 76312. This cannot be their standard design. No Air Force would build bombers this way. The fuselage gleamed in the tropical sun, its distinctive cylindrical shape justifying its allied nickname. Measuring nearly 20 meters from nose to tail, the bomber sat on its tricycle landing gear, like a massive cigar resting on the tarmac. The wings, spanning 25 meters tip to tip, showed no battle damage. The engines, 14-cylinder radials producing 2,500 horsepower each, appeared intact. This was not a crashed aircraft salvaged from wreckage. This was a complete, operational bomber abandoned by its crew during the American advance. But what had captured McCoy's complete attention, what would revolutionize American understanding of Japanese aviation doctrine, was what he discovered when he climbed inside the wings through the inspection panels. The fuel tanks were completely unprotected. No self-sealing rubber compound, no armor plating, no fire suppression systems, no protective coatings of any kind. Just thin aluminum skin, perhaps 2 millimeters thick, separating thousands of liters of high-octane aviation, fuel from enemy machine gun fire. Major McCoy, commander of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific, had examined dozens of crashed Japanese aircraft across the Pacific, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. This bomber, abandoned intact during the American liberation of Clark Field, would expose a design philosophy so alien to Western military, thinking that it would take months for analysts to fully comprehend its implications. The mathematics of this discovery would reshape American tactical doctrine and aircraft design for the remainder of the war. Every assumption American pilots held about enemy capabilities, about the price Japanese engineers were willing to pay for performance, about the value imperial forces placed on crew survival, was about to be systematically demolished by the evidence contained within this single, pristine example of Japan's most important bomber. The journey to this revelation had begun 4 years earlier, on December 8, 1941. That morning, as smoke still rose from Pearl Harbor, 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers lifted off from bases on Formosa. Their target was Clark Field itself, the primary American air base in the Philippines. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise. Arriving at 12:35 in the afternoon, the Japanese formation flew at 20,000 feet, beyond the reach of American anti-aircraft guns. 27 bombers from the initial wave dropped 636 bombs across Clark Field's runways and facilities. Moments later, 0 fighters swept in at treetop level, their machine guns destroying every aircraft that had survived the bombing run. Of 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 were destroyed outright. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk fighter was reduced to burning wreckage. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines had been effectively eliminated. Lieutenant James Harrington, one of the few surviving American pilots, watched from a bomb shelter as the Japanese formation withdrew to the north. "What struck me was how they came in," he later wrote in his combat report. "Perfect formation, high altitude, totally beyond our reach. Then the fighters dropped down and tore us apart. We couldn't get a single plane, airborne. But the Betty bombers themselves had departed untouched. The few American fighters that managed to get airborne arrived too late, finding only empty sky. The Japanese had demonstrated their bombers' exceptional range, striking from bases 1,460 miles away, a feat no American bomber could match at that stage of the war. The Betty's first year of combat would prove devastatingly effective. On December 10, 1941, just 2 days after the Clark Field raid, 26 G4M bombers joined with older G3M, Nell bombers and Attacking Force Z, a British naval task force built around the battleship, HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser, HMS Repulse. The attack began at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon. Japanese bombers approached in coordinated waves, their torpedo runs executed with a precision that stunned British observers. The Betty bombers carried Type 91 aerial torpedoes, each weighing 840 kilograms, with a 205-kilogram warhead. The torpedoes were designed specifically for shallow water operations, running at depths that could strike ships even in coastal waters. The torpedo attacks focused on the two capital ships with devastating accuracy. Prince of Wales, a battleship displacing 43,000 tons, took at least 6 torpedo hits, along with damage from level bombers. The underwater explosions ripped massive holes in the ship's hull, flooding overwhelmed damage control efforts. The battleship began listing severely. Repulse, a battlecruiser built during World War I but modernized in the 1930s, absorbed at least 4 torpedo hits while attempting to evade the attacking aircraft. Both capital ships capsized and sank within hours of the attack. Prince of Wales went down at approximately 13:20 hours. Repulse followed at approximately 13:33 hours. 841 British sailors died. For the first time in naval history, capital ships, actively defending themselves, had been sunk solely by air power while in the open sea. The G4M Betty bomber had achieved what naval theorists had debated for decades. British naval superiority in Asian waters had been shattered in 90 minutes. Across the Pacific theater through early 1942, American and Allied pilots encountered Betty bombers in every major engagement. The aircraft seemed to operate with impunity, striking targets at ranges that defied conventional understanding. They hit Darwin, Australia from bases 1,500 miles away, demonstrating reach that exceeded any Allied bomber's capability. They attacked Port Moresby from airfields across New Guinea's mountain ranges. They struck Guadalcanal from Rabaul, a distance exceeding 600 miles, projecting Japanese air power across vast ocean expanses. The Betty's operational range gave Japanese forces strategic flexibility that Allied commanders struggled to counter. American fighters based at forward positions lacked the range to intercept. Betty bombers departing from distant bases, Allied airfields came under attack from Japanese bases that were themselves beyond. Allied striking range, the asymmetry in bomber capability meant that Japanese forces could attack at will while Allied forces struggled to retaliate effectively. This advantage persisted through the first 6 months of the war. Betty bombers participated in virtually every Japanese offensive operation across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. But the advantage depended entirely on limited Allied fighter opposition. When Betty formations could strike without interception, when they could approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, when they could deliver weapons and depart before fighters arrived, the aircraft was devastatingly effective. These conditions characterized operations during the first half of 1942 when Allied air strength remained limited and dispersed. But by mid-1942, the tactical picture began to change. As American fighter strength increased, as Wildcats gave way to more capable Hellcats and Corsairs, as pilot training improved and tactical doctrine evolved, Betty crews began reporting disturbing losses. The shift became undeniable on August 8, 1942. 23 G4M bombers from the 4th Air Group departed Rabaul to attack. American positions at Guadalcanal, American fighters intercepted the formation over Savo Island. In the engagement that followed, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers were shot down. Approximately 120 aviators died in what would become the single worst G4M loss during the entire campaign. Fighter pilots reported the same observation across every engagement. The Betty exploded into flames with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produced catastrophic results. The aircraft earned grim nicknames that spread rapidly through. American Squadrons, Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, all references to the Betty's terrifying tendency to bloom into fire from battle damage. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrived at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17 flying F4U Corsairs, the Betty's reputation had transformed completely. First time we caught a Betty formation, we couldn't believe how easy they went down, Blackburn later reported. Hit them anywhere along the fuselage or wings and they'd explode. We actively hunted them, recognizing them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies. But the true extent of the Betty's vulnerability, the engineering decisions that made such catastrophic losses inevitable, would not be fully understood until American forces began capturing intact examples for detailed examination. The first significant intelligence breakthrough came in November 1942, when Australian forces overran Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Initial examinations confirmed what pilots had reported. The fuel tanks had no protection whatsoever. Aeronautical engineers with the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific conducted the first detailed analysis. The wing access panels revealed fuel cells with no protective measures. Thin aluminum construction, no rubber sealant layer, no protective coating, no fire suppression systems. Multiple Betty bombers examined at Buna showed identical characteristics. This was standard Japanese design. The implications were staggering. American bombers by 1942 universally featured self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress had incorporated them from the B-17C model onward. The B-24 Liberator had featured them from the XB-24B prototype. Even fighter aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 featured protected fuel systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks used a layered rubber compound that swelled on contact with fuel when punctured by bullets or shell fragments, sealing holes and preventing fuel loss and fire. The technology added substantial weight to aircraft but dramatically improved crew survival rates. American military doctrine considered this weight penalty essential and non-negotiable. Yet here was Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in thousands, operating across the entire Pacific theater with fuel tanks that offered zero protection. The weight saved by eliminating self-sealing systems, armor plating, and fire suppression equipment was immediately apparent. But the cost in crew lives was becoming equally obvious in lost statistics that mounted with every engagement. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 would provide the most complete technical analysis. Major McCoy and his team spent 3 weeks dismantling and documenting every system. Their report, classified secret and distributed to all Allied air forces, detailed specifications that explained both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. The G4M Model 1 specifications revealed an aircraft optimized ruthlessly for range and speed. Empty weight of 6,141 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber of its size. Fuel capacity of 4,180 liters. Distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing, positioned in the wing's center section where they were most vulnerable to combat damage. Top speed of 428 kilometers per hour, or approximately 265 miles per hour. Maximum range of 6,034 kilometers, exceeding 3,700 miles. The aluminum construction provided no protection. The absence of self-sealing compounds meant that even small punctures would leak fuel continuously. American engineers calculated that the weight saved by eliminating protection systems exceeded 500 kilograms per aircraft. This weight savings translated directly into additional fuel capacity and extended range. But the cost in vulnerability was equally calculable. Combat reports showed that Betty bombers hit anywhere in the wing area exploded with near certainty. The unprotected tanks created what engineers termed a critical failure point, a single system whose destruction guaranteed loss of the entire aircraft. These numbers told the story of design choices made in September 1937, when the Japanese Navy issued requirements that would define the G4M's entire existence. The Navy needed bombers capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the range of carrier aircraft, bombers that could operate from land bases to support naval operations across the entire theater. No bomber in service anywhere in the world in 1937 could strike targets at the distances Japanese planners envisioned. The requirements reflected Japanese naval strategy, an empire stretched across vast Pacific distances. But the requirements also reflected assumptions about future warfare that would prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese planners assumed that surprise and initiative would provide protection for long-range bombers, and that enemy fighter opposition would be limited by range and numbers. The man tasked with achieving the impossible was Kuro Honjo, who led the Mitsubishi design team. Honjo understood immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements would demand compromises that Western air forces would never accept. The mathematics were brutally simple. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needed massive fuel capacity. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needed minimal weight. Fuel was heavy. Protection systems were heavy. Armor. Plating weighing hundreds of kilograms would be required to protect crew positions. Self-sealing fuel tanks added substantial weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protection would prevent achieving the required performance. Honjo made the decision that would define the G4M throughout its service life. Protection would be sacrificed for performance. The fuel tanks would be unprotected aluminum construction, no self-sealing compounds, no armor plating, no fire suppression systems. Every kilogram saved would be invested in fuel capacity, range, and achieving the Navy's performance specifications. Honjo knew the risks, but the Navy had demanded performance. The first G4M prototype flew on. October 23, 1939, it met every performance requirement. Initial production models, designated G4M Model 1, began reaching operational units in April 1941. By December 1941, approximately 180 G4Ms were in service. The Betty's combat debut at Clark Field and against Force Z demonstrated the wisdom of Honjo's design. Priorities in the specific conditions of early 1942, when facing limited opposition when achieving surprise. When operating beyond the range of enemy fighters, the Betty was devastatingly effective. Its range allowed strikes from bases that enemies considered safe. Its speed permitted rapid penetration of target areas. But these advantages depended entirely on the assumption that Betty formations would face minimal opposition. The moment American fighter strength increased, the moment interception became routine, the moment sustained combat became inevitable. Every design choice that prioritized range over protection became a death sentence for crews. The Guadalcanal campaign exposed the fundamental flaw in the Betty's design philosophy. From August through October 1942, more than 100 G4M bombers were lost with their crews in what became a sustained bloodletting that Japanese air forces could not sustain. The single mission on August 8th alone destroyed 18 of 23 aircraft. The pattern repeated with brutal consistency throughout the campaign. Betty formations would depart from Rabaul, fly 600 miles to Guadalcanal, engage American fighters, and suffer catastrophic losses. The mathematics were inexorable. Every mission resulted in losses that could not be replaced. American fighter strength increased as more squadrons arrived at Henderson Field. Japanese losses accelerated, even as the number of bombers available for missions declined. By November, when the Guadalcanal campaign effectively ended, Betty losses exceeded 100 aircraft. Crew casualties approached 700 men dead. The exchange rate was unsustainable. Japan's most capable land-based bomber had been rendered obsolete by its own vulnerabilities, transformed from a feared weapon into what American pilots called easy meat. There was no middle ground, no wounded bombers limping home. Betty bombers either returned untouched or exploded in flames. By mid-1943, Japanese engineers recognized that modifications were essential, starting with the six-thousand-kilometer aircraft produced in March 1943, 30mm. Rubber sheets were installed beneath wing surfaces as a compromise measure, adding minimal weight while providing limited protection against fuel leakage. The modification reduced top speed and maximum range, but crew survival rates showed no significant improvement. The rubber sheets could slow fuel leakage from small caliber hits, but they could not prevent fires from larger caliber rounds or cannon shells. The fundamental vulnerability remained unchanged. Japanese designers attempted more comprehensive protection with the G4M Model 3, introduced in October 1944. This variant featured actual self-sealing fuel tanks, but capacity was reduced, resulting in a maximum range of 3,640 kilometers, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometers compared to the original. G4M Model 1, approximately 60 G4M Model 3 aircraft were produced by war's end. The modification came too late and in too limited numbers to affect the Betty's combat record. By late 1944, American air superiority was so complete that no level of fuel tank protection would have permitted Betty bombers to operate effectively. The Betty's vulnerability became so notorious that American forces began using the aircraft in ways that highlighted the dangers Japanese crews faced. On April 18, 1943, the Betty bomber became the instrument of Admiral Yamamoto's death in an engagement that demonstrated both American signals intelligence capabilities and the aircraft's fatal weaknesses. American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications, indicating that Yamamoto would fly from Rabaul to Bougainville. 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron were assigned to intercept the flight. The mission required extraordinary precision. The P-38s, would fly over 400 miles at wave top, height to avoid radar detection, navigate across open ocean without landmarks, and arrive at exactly the calculated intercept point. The formation arrived with precision that would become legendary. At 0934 hours, the P-38 spotted Yamamoto's formation, 2 Betty bombers flying at low altitude with 6 Zero fighters as escort. Captain Thomas Lanphier and First Lieutenant Rex Barber engaged the bombers. Barber engaged the lead Betty bomber, which carried Admiral Yamamoto. The bomber took hits to the wing area where the unprotected fuel tanks were located. The aircraft exploded in flames and crashed in the jungle. Yamamoto's body was recovered the following day. The second Betty bomber also crashed, killing all aboard. The operation demonstrated multiple aspects of Allied superiority.